The principal concerns of ancient European explorers were, remember, quite practical. The Greeks of the ancient world needed more land and more food, although exploration to find more land and more food led to overseas trade, which increased wealth. European exploration in the 15th century was also quite practical. It was generally not inspired by an intellectual desire to know what was out there just for the sake of knowing. European sailors did not climb aboard ships and set out on dangerous voyages simply for the pleasure of discovery. Behind every ship, behind every expedition, were sponsors, often kings and queens and later corporations, all looking to get rich. So there were profits to be had. And this, along with the desire for more territory to exploit and the religious zeal to spread the gospel among foreign peoples, these were the main interests, the motivation behind European exploration in the 15th century. And all three of these ideals were embodied in the first European leader to push for exploration outside the borders of Europe, Infante Henrique, or Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal. It was Prince Henry who promoted exploration, trade, and conquest against the Muslims. He was himself, after all, a crusading knight, a knight of the Order of Christ, a group of soldiers dedicated to the war against the Muslims. In fact, he seems to have been as interested in destroying the Muslims as he was in the monetary rewards to be gained by exploration. And yet Henry made good use of improvements in sailing, technology, and skill acquired from those very same Muslims, such as triangular sail, which enabled Europeans to build more maneuverable ship, the caravel. It was Henry himself who sponsored the construction of caravels for the Portuguese navy. Henry sent that navy against the Muslims in Africa, hoping to crush their domination of northern Africa. And it worked, more or less. While the Muslims remained in control of most of northern Africa, by the time of Henry's death in 1460, the Portuguese had managed to put an end to the Muslim monopoly over African gold, to explore and to colonize western and northwestern Africa, and to establish agricultural plantations. And of course, the Portuguese created rather lucrative trading stations, where they profited from trade in ivory, slaves, and gold. Moreover, it was the Portuguese sailor Vasco da Gama who first accomplished the goal of sailing from Europe around Africa all the way to India in 1499. But where do the Americas come into all of this? The continents of North and South America? Well, while the Portuguese were the first to get out there and explore beyond their own borders, they were not to become the most powerful colonial empire, nor were they the first to reach the Americas. That accomplishment belonged to Spain. Now, chances are you already know what year the Spanish reached the Americas. Kids in school in the United States memorized that year along with the name of the man usually associated with the discovery of the Americas, Christopher Columbus. And yet, the year 1492 should be remembered for other reasons as well, for events that had to happen before Columbus made his historic voyage. In fact, without these events, Columbus probably would have never made it to the Americas. You see, in 1492, when Columbus was looking for a government to support his ambition to go sailing around the world, nobody paid him much attention. The governments of Italy, including Genoa, where Columbus came from, wanted nothing to do with him. So he sailed to Spain and went begging to the Catholic king and queen there. Bad timing, at least at first. Back in 1469, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon had married. Their kingdoms and armies were combined, and they were too busy fighting the Muslims in Spain to care much for overseas exploration. This was the brutal period of the Reconquista, the reconquest of Spain by the Christians. But then, at the beginning of 1492, the last Muslim forces in Spain, in Granada, surrendered to the Spanish, which allowed Spain to be fully unified and Christianized once again. So Columbus asked the king and queen again for help, money, ships. But money was not so easy to come by just yet. Sure, the Spanish had won the long war against the Muslims, but wars are expensive. Before they could help Columbus, the king and queen needed to help themselves. They had taken all the territory and possessions they could from the Muslims in Spain, but that wasn't enough. And they couldn't very well steal from their fellow Christians. So who else was there in Spain at the time? Someone else they could steal from? How about the Jews? Under the Muslims, the Jews of Spain had lived pretty well, had achieved some financial success, but they were Jews. And on the 31st of March, 1492, King Ferdinand approved the Alhambra decree for the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. The Jews had 3 months to make up their minds. 1, convert to Christianity and you may stay in Spain. 2, leave Spain and take no substantial wealth with you, since that wealth would now belong to the king. Or 3, if you stay in Spain as a Jew, you will be tortured to death. Thus began the Inquisition in Spain, the time when the Christian crowns of Spain and other areas of Europe began to persecute a large portion of their Jewish populations. So here are the first 2 reasons why 1492 was such an important year. But most people remember the 3rd reason. On the 3rd of August, 1492, commissioned by Isabella and Ferdinand, Christopher Columbus set out on a long and dangerous voyage over the Atlantic Ocean to Asia. Remember that whole thing about finding a safe sea route to the east, right? Trade with Asia? That's what Columbus was trying to do, although he also wanted to spread Christianity, a goal that Queen Isabella heartily approved of. And if he succeeded, King Ferdinand had promised to name Columbus Admiral of the Seas, a wealthy and powerful man for the rest of his life, and a reward that his family could continue to enjoy after his death. So Columbus took 3 small caravels, La Niña, La Pinta, and La Santa Maria, with a total crew of about 90 men, and sailed from Spain, traveling west, thinking that in no time at all he would reach Asia. In the 5th week of their journey, far out at sea, with no Asia in sight, his crew began to talk of mutiny. Columbus was lucky to survive. But on the 70th day, they did finally sight land. And on the 12th of October, 1492, they landed on a small island in the Bahamas, which Columbus named San Salvador. Columbus was convinced that he had reached the East Indies, what would today be Indonesia, which is why he called the people of the Americas Indians, and thus began the conquest of the Americas, fueled by the lust for wealth, power, and religious domination.